Hello and welcome. My name is Neflarian Shadowflame. I'll be your host for this video, so let's get into it. Before we start though, I want to preface this a little. This is not a first impressions. I've had plenty of time to think about it and discuss my feelings about Endwalker with other people. With that out of the way, spoilers ahead. If you don't want to be spoiled on the Endwalker 6.0 MSQ, please click off the video now. So I just want to start off by saying that I thoroughly enjoyed Endwalker. I never felt like the plot jumped the shark at any point despite the crazy and unexpected twists and turns we were taking on. The character work was on point for most of the expansion aside from a few questionable decisions. However, the pacing did suffer in a few places though. That is not only to say that it slowed down unnecessarily in some places, but in some places it also moved over some things way too quickly and didn't flesh them out enough. All that said, I feel like Shadowbringers is still the best expansion of Final Fantasy XIV. Numerically speaking, if Shadowbringers was a 9.5, I would give Endwalker a solid 8. So yeah, I'll be the first to admit they got me with a Final Fantasy IV fake-out with all the callbacks they made before Endwalker launch. I found it really impressive with the sheer number of callbacks and effort they put into making all of them, only to very, very quickly pull the rug out from under us as soon as the game got going. As soon as I realized that no, this was not just going to be a one-to-one recreation or a very similar callback to Final Fantasy IV, and it was going to be its own game, it made me really, really happy. If it had been just a retelling of Final Fantasy IV, that could have been really, really boring. Especially as I had just completed my first full playthrough of FF4 via the Pixel Remasters just a few weeks before Endwalker released. But not only did they fake us out, they took the story in directions that were not things that I found to be unlikely, but directions that were never even on my radar as possibilities to begin with. I must say that for the most part, much of the story of Endwalker made sense in the context of everything that came before it. They did an amazing job of tying up most of the loose ends from earlier in the story, bringing in a lot of the side content and tying it to the main story in a believable way, and answering many of the side questions that we've all had while adding a lot of new content for us all to enjoy. Not to mention the excellent job they did of keeping us guessing on just exactly where the story was going until well more than halfway through it. I won't lie, it wasn't until about halfway through Elpis that I finally started feeling like the story was giving me more answers than new questions. The question I am the most happy about them addressing is the Warrior of Light the sundered soul of the last holder of the Seat of Azim? The answer being yes. Though they didn't come out and directly say it, it was very heavily implied with both present and past Hythlodaeus pointing out that the Warrior of Light has a soul the exact same color as the last Azim. That said, I do love how the story of Endwalker doesn't pay lip service to the trope of having hope and carrying on despite overwhelming despair around you. No, they aren't afraid to put you in some really dark situations and explore just what it means to be in the deepest pit of despair and suffering. To explore what it looks like, and what it means to be at your lowest points and having to pick yourself up and carry on regardless. Speaking of dark situations though, I'm going to be discussing a scene from Garlemald that comes kind of out of nowhere, but to put it gently at first, since I know this is a sensitive topic, the death of the Legatus Quintus. Before we get further into this topic, I want to take the time to preface this with this information, that while I may not have been super close with them, I have personally known 2 people that have committed suicide. So, while I appreciate Square Enix's willingness to take on such a sensitive topic head-on, I feel like they sort of gloss over the aftermath of it a little bit. Now I know some people may think they should have put in a trigger warning, or hinted it was coming better. I kind of disagree with that. Suicide is usually one of those things that's very, very difficult to see coming, even when you know the person. More often than not, even the closest people to the victim are blindsided and don't see the signs until after it happened, if they saw them at all. So no, I don't think it should have been hinted at more beforehand, but I do think the aftermath of that action was glossed over rather quickly. Yes, stopping to explore this plot point a little more may have slowed down the story some, but with how much time is unnecessarily spent on other plot points, I think they could have taken the time to give the situation a better resolution than the silence it was given aside from the acknowledgement that it happened. Onto a more light-hearted plot point, but somewhat questionable decision on the part of Hydaelyn. That decision being the escape plan using the moon. Yes, I know. It ultimately turned out that the escape plan didn't need to be used, and it's all well and good to have an escape plan, but there's a problem with this escape plan. The problem is that Hydaelyn knew Aether is what suppressed the influence of Dynamis, or at least she should have known. Knowing that, it explains why she strove so hard to keep Zodiark alive, albeit confined. So she would have also known that the moon being smaller would be comprised of less Aether, thus it and its occupants would be much more susceptible to the influence of Dynamis. It's implied that the trip to a new planet via the moon will likely take decades, possibly even centuries, if not longer. They would have to make sure everyone on board is getting along, and keep anyone from falling into even a mild depression, lest they be at risk of transforming and causing many, many problems for everyone else. So yeah, Hydaelyn's escape plan?
Not a great plan.
And finally, to round these out, the decision to bring back Emet-Selch and Hythlodaeus at the end of Ultima Thule was unnecessary. Don't get me wrong, I loved having Emmet and Hythlodaeus with us in Elpis. Elpis was my favorite Endwalker zone. It allowed a lot of insight into Emet-Selch and Vana, aka Hydaelyn, and why they made the decisions they made. Now, given the nature of the Warrior of Light, we could have found a way forward at the end of Ultima Thule without needing to rely on the Ancients to come back and bail us out. This is especially true given that Ultima Thule is a place where emotions dictate reality, and they hinted several times through the story that the limit break is powered by Dynamis, meaning the Warrior of Light would be very capable of wielding the power of emotions and making a way forward. I will make no attempts to hide it. When I played through Stormblood, I found Xenos to be a lot more engaging a villain than Nidhogg. Both were one-note villains, yes, but while Nidhogg's motivation was understandable and relatable to a degree, there was no depth to it, nor was there ever any chance of there being depth to it. Xenos, on the other hand, being a member of the royal family of Garlemald, there was the potential for a lot of depth to his character, and a chance to understand his motives. Fast forward to Endwalker, and we got none of the depth or complexity I was hoping for, at least nothing in the way of justifying Xenos being the final fight of the expansion. To clarify, I don't mean the final trial, I mean the fight with Xenos after the final trial. We spend pretty much the entire expansion ignoring Xenos, as we have more important things to deal with than his single-minded obsession to fight with us again. This is what I was talking about when I said the pacing moved over some things too quickly. We never stopped long enough for Xenos to establish himself as a person we feel we need to deal with. On multiple occasions, we let Xenos walk off. One time on the moon, he walks within a few feet of us, and we make no attempt to stop him or hinder him in any way. The one time Xenos had the opportunity to make us mad enough to want to actually have to deal with him, Fandaniel steps in and stops it. That being the body swap duty. He didn't need to kill anyone, but if he had simply at least injured any of our friends, not even necessarily a Scion, it would have gone a long way to justify Xenos being the final fight of the expansion. This is especially apparent when you contrast Endwalker Xenos to any of the previous expansion villains. A Realm Reborn. We have no direct interaction with Gaius until about level 40 in the MSQ, but when we finally do, it sets everything in motion for why we confront him at the end of 2.0. Heaven's Ward. Thoradin and the Knights 12, aka the Archbishop and the Heaven's Ward, don't really do anything antagonistic towards us for the first part of 3.0, but after killing Nidhogg, they really become an antagonistic force, going so far as to try to kill us and killing Horsefant in the process. Stormblood. Xenos attacks Rhalgar's Reach, kills a lot of people in front of us, severely injures Y'shtola, and beats us twice. Shadowbringers. Emet-Selch. Do I really even need to explain? Didn't think so. Long story short, Endwalker Xenos just does not earn the final fight. This is not even to mention how Xenos says he'd let us leave, and we're not even given the option to try leaving. We're forced to fight him regardless of our interest in doing so. On the other extreme of pacing issues, we have things that dragged on too long. Those things, sadly, being centered around Wilburitz. I like the Wilburitz as a concept. They add a lot of much-needed levity to the story right when it really needs it. From the first dungeon through killing Zodiark feels like you are just flying at breakneck speeds on a roller coaster of emotions. And once you get to the Wilburitz, you're allowed to slow down, catch your breath, and process everything that just happened. The problem is, both times the story is centered around the Wilburitz, the story quickly starts to feel like it's grinding to a halt. For instance, sampling the food the Wilburitz have on hand should we need to evacuate to the moon makes sense, but then we're immediately sent to try their clothing options not once, but twice. Then, we're treated to a trip through their forest, which is fine, but then we're asked to go on a walk which takes entirely too long. Only to have that followed up by the Wilburitz not wanting us to leave because they think we won't start the evacuation of Etheris. And they're right, because by that point in the story I was thinking more that we needed to see if we could stop the final days before we evacuated, but it came off as an unnecessary hindrance to me. The next section with the Wilburitz was the second part of Labyrinthos. Alphino volunteered us to fix the Forum's ship's engine problems, and as soon as we have a potential solution for that, rather than helping, we get to wait for the parts we need to be delivered. And while we waited, we got to go around with the Wilburitz dealing with their existential crisis. The most annoying part of this being having to run around a fairly large area looking for 8 NPCs out of the 15 or so marked NPCs during one particular quest. It should also be mentioned that when we were volunteered to help with the Aether Burner, no one thought to call Sid. You know, the one guy we know who would have definitely been able to help regardless of what the problem was. Though I will admit, the second bit with the Wilburitz did lead to a touching moment with Urianger and Moonbreeda's parents. A very touching moment, yes, though I wish it had been set up earlier and better than it was. Now I know quite a number of people hated the escort quests, but I actually quite enjoyed them. I thought they added a lot of depth and immersion to the game over the tried and true method of, we're going to the same place for the same reason, at the same time, but I'm going to disappear and meet you there. I will say, however, that I agree that they were very overused. Sometimes it felt like every other quest or so, you were doing another escort quest. Now maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if they didn't feel the need to give us the escort instructions every time we had to do one. It would have been nice to also have them be more optional, or at least more obviously optional. I know if you spoke to them they had a dialogue option to part ways, but since I never used it, I can't say if that would force them to the end of the quest, or make you have to start it over. Maybe that's something I'll have to try with New Game Plus. Yes, I know most of this video seems to be nitpicking and pointing out what I perceive to be flaws. But if I went over everything I liked about Endwalker, we'd probably be sitting here for 5 or 6 hours, so better to go over what I didn't like as much rather than everything else. I really did like Endwalker. It just wasn't quite as good as Shadowbringers for me. That said, considering I was hoping for a story even half as good as Shadowbringers, I'm wholly satisfied with the outcome. Anyway, thanks for tuning in and listening. If you like this video, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing, and until next time, flame on, my friends.